Hello everyone and welcome back to the Second Party Podcast. Recently, my wife and I were driving to the grocery store doing some grocery shopping like we typically do, and we encountered some stuff in our neighborhood that I thought was worth talking about. So I'm back today with my wife to talk about that a little bit and how it relates to a couple YouTube videos I've watched recently and one of the 10 Commandments actually. So with that, let's dive right in.
All right, so what's the story we're talking about here today? Because I have not been briefed for this. I'm kind of getting thrown in blind.
Sure. So, do you remember maybe a week ago when we were driving around to get groceries and we saw a number of quote-unquote homeless people kind of panhandling on some of the curbs?
Okay, yes.
For our listeners, I want to clarify a few things. So, first off, obviously in many areas, seeing homeless people panhandling or around the area is not atypical. But in our neck of the woods, which is kind of suburbia, it's relatively uncommon.
It is very uncommon in this suburbia. I mean, we're kind of right on the edge of the cities, so we're accessible to the city with driving, but there is not really public transportation that comes out here to where we are, so it is unusual to have panhandlers. Yes.
Yeah. And you and I, there's a fair amount to do in the city, and we venture into the city pretty frequently. So, we're no strangers to homeless or people who are down on the luck, downtrodden. And, I want to be clear that we have the utmost sympathy and love for people that are in these tough positions, have fallen on hard times.
Well, yeah, I mean, we usually try to keep little packages in our car that we can give to people when we encounter them.
Yeah. But, that being said, it's our understanding it's our understanding and the understanding of many of the folks, I think, who live in the area that we do, that many of these panhandlers are not actually homeless, right?
Right. Well, I don't remember seeing this a lot until maybe the last couple of years. The past couple years is when it's been really apparent to me, and so much so that I didn't really think that much about it. We would see people in our city and be like, wow, that's really unusual to see people here. Mm-hmm. But we would, give them a care package and be on our way. And I didn't think much about it until I'm on one of our city neighborhood Facebook pages. Yeah. And people really started talking about this on the page because a lot of people were noticing this uptick in panhandlers coming and sitting on the roads, and a lot of people were just saying things about how you shouldn't really be handing things out to these people. It's a group of people. We see them coming around every summer. It's the same people. Mm-hmm. People saying things about how they see these people walk off and get into nice cars and drive away, which in and of itself does not necessarily mean that person hasn't fallen on hard times, but a lot of people in the city that we live in on this neighborhood page were saying things about how they don't think these people are legitimate, and it's the same few people that you see at specific spots, and you see them.
And we've seen stuff like this on it's not one or two posts. It's pretty frequent on these Facebook groups, next door type of thing, right?
Yeah. It's very frequent. Anytime someone comments something about it, it's it gets flooded with comments because a lot of people have things to say about, Yeah. Sometimes people will come with their small dogs and their signs will say, I'm a homeless dog owner, all this stuff. People have talked about things on this Facebook page about how they've seen these people get up and leave a bunch of litter or unused food because these people are saying they're really only interested in getting money. And we do live in a suburb that is more affluent, somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, like, relatively speaking.
Relatively speaking. I mean, we're on the outskirts of the city, but it is, and there are different parts of the city, but overall, the suburb is relatively affluent. So, a lot of people have been saying on this Facebook page about how it's a very lucrative thing to get into is panhandling, because you will get people giving you money.
Yeah,
and
I've heard from a number of people who have, like, taken the time out of their day to approach the so-called homeless or these panhandlers, and like, it's my understanding that the county or the city has kind of like a program that's specifically designed for people in these tough situations to try and help them get back on their feet, right?
Yeah.
That help locate jobs.
Right. I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I believe that in the city we live in, it is technically not legal to be doing this. And so what you're supposed to be doing is calling the, like, non-emergency police line, not to come have these people arrested or anything, but the police will, my understanding is,
like, community service members.
Yes.
They're designated
these people
community service
will
members.
come and talk to the
Yeah.
people and say, like, here are the resources that the city can provide. We have a food shelf here. If you're looking for a job, here are the resources we can help you out with.
Yeah,
And
there's
so
a
I've
local
also
food shelf.
I've also seen
They'll temporarily put people up in homes until they can get back on their feet and get jobs.
Yes. And I've also seen people on this Facebook page saying things like they did that, they talked to the person, or they, like, got an officer to come talk to the person, and what else can you do, right?
From what I've heard, certain people have outright rejected that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've had a lot of people I've seen on the page say that as well. Yeah, so it's gotten very difficult, and I've been trying to process how best to handle it, because on one end, I'm not trying to sit here and just say, oh, well, there's no way you're facing tough times, and just assume that someone's lying if they're standing there on the side of the road. That's not what I want. I don't want that to be my first thought.
Yeah, obviously.
But I've just seen a lot of these things where it's like, what do you do? Because I don't, at the same time, want to be giving my resources that I am supposed to be a good steward of, and reinforcing a behavior that is effectively a scam. Right?
Yeah, I think, with all of this information, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've come to the conclusion, and I think that you have too, that kind of the default assumption is that folks that claim to be homeless and are panhandling in the area that we live in specifically, I think the default assumption is that they're not actually in that level of need and are doing so nefariously.
I think at this point, yes, that is the assumption.
And I want to be in this area.
Yeah, especially the reason that I came to that assumption, or maybe why that shifted to me, because that was definitely not always my assumption.
Yeah, I agree.
Because of all these things I was seeing on the Facebook page and the patterns that I also was seeing. Where it's like every summer, I kind of recognize this person. I recognize this dog they come with. Mm-hmm. So it sucks, because I don't want that to have to be my first assumption.
Yeah, it's...
And you get the people on the Facebook page that react very strongly. And some people say, how dare you be questioning the legitimacy of these people? Like, I always just hand out money no matter what. It's not your place to question it. And it's like, okay, that's your choice if you want to do that. If these people are effectively scam artists, though, I don't want to be reinforcing that. And I don't want to be contributing to that. And I have a responsibility to be a good steward of my resources. Mm-hmm. Because anything, resources, taking a zoomed out approach or look at this, are limited. right? Anything you
Yeah.
give to someone, you are saying you cannot give that thing to someone else.
Yeah. This kind of reminded me of, a really well done YouTube video by an independent creator called, quote, For a Week. So I think, a fair amount of his videos, he'd focus on doing one thing, either something small or something bigger, like for a whole week. And in one of his videos, he documents, quote unquote, becoming a panhandler for a week.
I remember you showing me this video.
And, he lives in, or he was focusing on and panhandling in an environment that I would say is more urban, less suburban than the area that we live in. Mm-hmm. And so it would stand to reason that, at least in my opinion, the likelihood that someone who's panhandling or homeless is legitimate is actually higher where he's examining this. Mm-hmm. Okay, and he kind of approached this from a number of different angles. First was he was getting an understanding of exactly how lucrative panhandling was, and he was also examining other panhandlers in the area and kind of going like undercover.
He was talking to other people.
Yeah.
Right.
And we'll put a link down in the description, so go watch his video. It's titled quote, I became a panhandler for a week, not clickbait. And I can attest, he does some great work, and it's not clickbait. He really...
It was a great video.
I think it's a really comprehensive video, because not only does he highlight kind of like... Personally, I think he takes a very scientific approach, where he's just looking at things and going, let's gather as much information as we can here. And that includes how lucrative is panhandling, what are people giving out, how do people reach out to him. There are a number of instances where he's highlighting, like, a woman comes up with her kid and had bought him a meal at like a nearby restaurant and brought it up to him, and he was like, she's setting a phenomenal example for her kid here. Like, mm-hmm. This is a phenomenal lesson for this kid to learn to help people and how to help people and whatnot. And, it ended up that on a few days, I think, he was getting $60-$70 an hour panhandling. Now, you can say that that's optimized for certain times of day, but that's still crazy lucrative. And he was making a fair amount of money daily doing this.
Oh, and like tax-free too, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're supposed to report it, but you're getting it cash. And, I thought that part was really interesting. And then he kind of flipped it and did some like kind of undercover stuff. And it seemed like a fair amount of the people who are panhandling were not actually in need. And there's a point in the video where he goes to get a meal for someone, and one of the folks at the restaurant where he is purchasing food basically just says like, "Oh yeah, those people, they're totally fine. Like they're trying to scam people here, essentially." And he comes to some great conclusions at the end where he essentially states that, there are some people who fake it, but there are also folks that really do need help. And, at the end, he kind of summarizes his conclusion and says that, going forward, he's going to give food, he'll give clothes, he'll give time and shelter if he can, but that he's not going to be giving people money unless he can confirm that the person is, truly in need, and that the money is going to go
to something
be used well
to help that need.
Yeah. And I totally agree with him. You mentioned this earlier, but we try and keep kind of like a gallon Ziploc bag type of thing in our car with like non-perishable foods, like small things like toiletries or socks, other necessities, stuff like that, so that when we come across someone, we are able to help, but help in what at least I think is a more productive way. Mm-hmm. So now that we've been painstakingly clear and have addressed how we should respond and help people, even if we don't know if they're really truly in need or not, but but especially those in need. I want to address kind of those that are panhandling by choice and who are doing this because it seems to be lucrative. I think there are two things with this. The first is it's actually kind of heartwarming and good to hear that, like, at least in a way, that this is something lucrative.
Yeah, that people are generous enough to make it that worthwhile.
Yeah, like, clearly, for this to be lucrative for people, the reason that people are exploiting this is because others are generous. So it's good and kind of, like, I really thought it was heartwarming watching and understanding that, like, folks who are really down on their luck and do need to resort to that as they're getting back on their feet, hopefully, that they're being adequately provided for, that people in general seem to be generous and help folks out. The other side of that, the more negative approach, is that, because this panhandling is lucrative, people are clearly exploiting it. These are people that could get or hold down a job and don't. And they're choosing to do it instead of working for an honest living.
Right. Especially in kind of our current climate where
there's a serious labor shortage.
99% of people, like, you're going to be able to get a job.
Yeah, you can walk into so many businesses right now at an entry-level job that's paying $15 an hour or more. Like, I've seen plenty of things like, we're hiring at $20 an hour, we're hiring at $22 an hour. And these are entry-level things where they're hiring people on the spot.
Yeah.
Okay? Because we're so short on labor right now.
Everyone's desperate. Yeah.
And these people are choosing to panhandle and take advantage of everyday people that are trying to help those in need.
Right.
And, I want to reiterate all of the stuff that we've highlighted before, where plenty of people are not able to hold down a job or are down on their luck and are trying to get back on their feet. Okay, I'm specifically focusing on those that could and should be contributing meaningfully to society in a productive fashion, holding down an honest job, making an honest living, and choose to panhandle instead. I think that those folks that exploit the system are doing something evil, like, plain and simple. Not only are you, from an opportunity cost standpoint, taking from those who really do need this, but it's also particularly egregious and, in my opinion, evil because it poisons the well. What we've been talking about this whole time is, well, there are people who are exploiting this. Well, now every single time that I come up on someone, like, there's something in the back of my head. I mean,
right.
I was aware of this before too, but now it's almost like, instead of it being the 10th thing I think about, it's like the second or maybe the first thing I think about.
Right, especially depending on the area you're in. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was saying, where it's like, I hate that is what my mind jumps to now, which it didn't until this really started kicking up in our town, and a lot of people were sharing their, like, poor experiences with trying to help these people on the Facebook page.
Yeah, I mean, in the back of my mind, I was always, like, smart and thoughtful with resources and how to help people out. But, like I said, that was maybe the 10th thing I was thinking about, not the first or second. And as it works up in those ranks of things that are coming to mind, I think when you apply this to broad swaths of the population, the likelihood that somebody is going to help goes down.
Right, because if you're someone who now is skeptical of people who are panhandling, how many people out there maybe are legitimately in need, but now those people are like, oh, I'm not giving out because I don't know.
Yeah.
So maybe people who actually need help are no longer going to receive that same generosity. Because is that what you mean by poison the well?
Yeah, it poisons the well. And to me, this kind of reminded me of a really interesting YouTube video from a phenomenal series by PragerU that was actually on the Ten Commandments. And if you don't know, the main leader of Prager University, or PragerU, is Dennis Prager, and he's a practicing Jew. So understanding the in-depth perspective from a practicing Jew on the Ten Commandments, to me, is really interesting. Mm-hmm. And getting kind of a bit of a different look at something like that as a Christian is really interesting to me. So one of the things that he was talking about when it came to the Third Commandment, where
I always get like the second, third, and fourth one mixed up.
The first like 3 are with God, and then 4, sorry.
So the first one is, you shall have no God before me. Second is no idols, right? Or the first one is like, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, whatever.
It is actually, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me.
I was pretty close.
Yeah, you got the first half like dead on.
The second one is, you shall not make a false idol.
Yeah, it's false idols. It's longer, but yeah.
And the third one is, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain.
Yeah, so the Third Commandment in the Ten Commandments reads, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. And Dennis Prager kind of talks about this and expands this a bit further, and essentially says that taking the Lord's name in vain is doing evil in God's name, or discrediting God by your actions, acting as a bad faith actor in the name of God. And he talks a bit about like why this would be the case, why it's such a critical offense. I mean, it's coming up as the Third Commandment, and and part of the reason that this is so bad is it's poisoning the well and it's discrediting God's name. And I think similarly, the evil that's coming out of panhandling nefariously is that you're discrediting and poisoning the well of these other people. One of the worst things you can do to another person is like maliciously betray them. And part of the reason for this is, it pulls into question the very sense of reality for that person that you betrayed. Mm-hmm. Where they once thought they were before, as Jordan Peterson kind of describes it, like now, in an instant, they're in a different place from like a metaphorical feeling perspective, where once they thought they were safe and they could trust you in one instance, the next, now they're not in that safe place and they can't trust you.
Right. So it damages your witness to other people.
Yeah, and
that's ultimately the negative effect of doing evil in the name of the Lord, is you're damaging your witness to other people and you're misrepresenting God.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of it weakens the understanding of onlookers and hurts their relationship with God, or it discredits those folks who profess to actually be doing things in God's name, and now you're lumping yourself in the bucket with them. I think something similar is also we're seeing this more and more with protests, where people who oppose the protesters are actually joining in and participating as bad faith actors with the sole intention of discrediting the group, whether that's by, inciting violence or driving people towards more and more heightened things to discredit that movement. These groups then have to spend like significant effort to remove like these nefarious actors and snakes from their rankings. And this is something that like you see with the church. And to me, while I'm not happy about it in many of these instances, whether it's people protesting or the church, like these are places where there are groups of people where there can be kind of a communal or a targeted approach, and we can weed these people out. But that's not really that's not terribly feasible when we're talking about panhandlers. These are people who are in a very vulnerable spot.
Well, and it puts a bad taste in people's mouth. Like, about panhandlers, or about, if you're doing evil in God's name, about God, or about Christianity, or about the church, or Christians, or whatever. You're putting a bad taste in people's mouth, and that is so difficult to overcome for a lot of people. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've heard people's reason for leaving the church, or reason for being an atheist, or reason for, just being agnostic or having no interest in Christianity is because of how they've been hurt by other Christians or how they've been hurt by a church. Once people have that bad taste, that's a difficult thing to contend with.
Yeah, and I mean, similarly, I don't know about you, but I've heard so many people who talk about like panhandlers or the homeless, and people, whether it's, oh, they don't need this money, or they're going to use it for alcohol or drugs, or plenty of these other things. And, while I think that that's something that definitely needs to be kept in mind, I think many people don't spend the time and effort to go a step further and ask, okay, well, how can we mitigate those negatives while continuing to help people, right? Can we give something other than money? Because it takes a lot more time to go out of your way to stop at a gas station, to pop into a Subway, or stop at Chipotle and get somebody some food. It takes more time to stop at a Target or a Walmart and get this person a new jacket or something than it is to just give them money and move on with your day, or to just say, well, like, oh, this is difficult, right? The barrier to entry is high. I don't have time for this. Screw it. I'm just going to continue on with my day. Forget about it. Because people have lost faith in those who profess to be homeless and in need. The people that are truly homeless, in need, that are down on their luck, receive less support than they otherwise would. The really frustrating thing with this is there's only so much that you can do to try and counteract things, right? And it's way easier to, as with anything, it's way easier to destroy than to build up. It's easier to poison the well than to filter out said poison. And I think about, with Christianity, you have things like the Westboro Baptist Church.
Yeah, I was going to ask you for what are some examples of this.
Or how many other people have just said terrible, horrible, non-productive things against folks who are homosexual or things like that. And they've not only turned those people off, but have turned off anyone else who's hearing that. And I'm not saying that one compromises on one's beliefs.
Right.
But how you're expressing these messages should be really well thought out.
It's a difficult task too. It really is.
Yeah, but I mean, you could even look at it okay, think about Islam. Just like Christianity with the Westboro Baptist Church, where I think most Christians look at that and go, what the hell are you doing? You're discrediting and just setting us back more and more. I think a lot of Muslims would look at some of what happens in these Middle Eastern countries or these terrorist attacks, and they go, what are you doing? This is so unproductive. It's almost like you're playing for the other side. You're doing so much damage to us, more damage than anyone else could. It's the same thing with terrorist attacks as with the Westboro Baptist Church. Both of these things do more damage to the community that they're quote unquote supporting than anyone else possibly could.
Right. I understand what you're saying about, doing evil in God's name. How do you find that balance between standing true to your convictions or to truth or against the culture, against societal norms, especially in a day and age like today where our culture says if you don't agree with my lifestyle, if you have any questions or raise any concerns about what I'm doing, like you are attacking me, and they use that as a reason in and of itself to turn away from Christianity.
Well, I think the approach looks something similar to what we should be doing with like the homeless or panhandlers, people who are down on their luck, okay? Which is that first we should have one way of approaching the things in just like kind of a default fashion that is how you approach things when you don't have additional time. And then secondarily, there are also instances where we need to be willing, just as a general rule, if you want to convince people of things or do the right thing, sometimes you need to be willing to sacrifice time and energy to do that. So when it comes to the homeless situation or panhandlers, what we outlined earlier with these homeless packages or care packages, that to me is the kind of default type of thing where I don't have time for this right now. I need to get home. I need to cook dinner. I need to, get to my next meeting, what have you. We all have instances where we can't just go take an hour, a half hour out of our days. So that's the default there. And to me, the default with Christianity would be to clearly state what you believe in a loving fashion and invite that person to church. I think that to me is kind of the default type of thing. I think we need to build in to our days a willingness and a flexibility that allows us to take that extra time. So with folks who are homeless or, panhandling, things like this in tough situations, I think sitting here and going, okay, I've got some flexibility. It's a Saturday. Yeah, we were going to go out shopping or whatever, but we're going to take 30 minutes like that woman and her kid in the video where they said, we've got time right now. We're going to walk over. We're going to get this person some food. We're going to talk with them. There were a number of people in the video who, took time out of their day, talked to either the panhandlers or the guy who was making the video, and tried to help out, get jobs, get resources, put somebody up in a hotel, put them in contact with either friends who have job openings, or get them in contact with resources to help them get back on their feet. And I think the Christian side of that would be to sit down with that person, start by listening and understanding first. And I think many of the conversations would sound similar to, asserting your beliefs, but also I think empathizing with people when you disagree with them is oftentimes what leads to the most productive conclusion. And I want to be clear that this does not necessarily mean that you change your perspective. It in no way means that you compromise on your thoughts and morals. Just like in the homeless situation, I didn't even necessarily assert that you give somebody money. You can take a bunch of extra time and you can talk to somebody and you can buy them a good meal. You can take a bunch of time and sit down and talk to somebody and really listen to them and understand their side of things and not change your perspective whatsoever. But I think that when you understand the perspective that somebody is in,
not change your perspective in terms of your morals or beliefs.
correct.
Right. But I think you can gain a new perspective about maybe the struggle someone is having.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make a sort of connection with them, help them feel heard, help them know that they are loved. I think the other important thing is entering it with like an attitude of humility, because the other thing I hear a lot
like
about
openness.
about Christians, I hear this so much, just side comments from people at work, all over random places, is just Christians are so judgmental, or Christians just think they're better than everyone else. So it's can be a difficult thing to do, but coming into, if you're going to sit down and have a conversation with someone and try to approach them, coming in with an attitude of like, I see you as a human being, like you have value, you are loved. I don't think that you are less valuable than me. Mm-hmm. And I recognize that, there are things in your life that I have serious disagreements with, but that doesn't mean that I am perfect. Right? Because I'm not. And having that humility coming into it doesn't mean that you're just let up on your convictions, but I think that can go a long way.
Yeah, this is kind of reminding me of there's a video. I want to say it's Logan Paul. It may be Jake Paul, but one of them, somebody yells at him and then spits on him and runs away, like some woman does. Okay. And it would have been totally justified if he just like screamed back or had a bunch of people chase this person down or whatever. Okay. Just got in some yelling match. Okay. And to me, this is oftentimes what happens when we're not willing to like build out that time in our schedule to have a nuanced, thoughtful take or approach to something. You get these, what I would call, what I would liken to like just a quick Twitter take. Boom, just like send it off. Like somebody says you suck, you just send back, screw you.
Yeah.
One of these just visceral whatevers. And he kind of jogs after this person with some other people and like really calmly, actually. It was so interesting. He really calmly just looked at this girl and was like, look, I understand that, you see me as this YouTube star or whatever. I get all that. But, like, I'm a person too. And you can't just go around spitting on people. Like, this is not how people ought to conduct themselves. This is not what you should do to people, and it's not appropriate. And it doesn't matter if somebody makes a bunch of money and is some big personality, or if they're just another person on the street. This is not appropriate. And her reaction to that, I don't know if this was, some life-changing moment for her or not, but the way that it looked is like she was actually listening. And if he had just fired back with a screw you, you're the worst, I hate you, and then he could have easily gone on, his podcast, his YouTube channel, and just made into this big thing, everybody hates me, screw the haters type of thing, that would have been very easy. But instead, he paused and took the time to actually help somebody better understand their wayward ways in a particular instance.
Yeah, well, it's like that proverb that's, a gentle answer turns away wrath.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so true. Like, it is a powerful thing, having a gentle answer to someone, especially when people are being very combative, or people do have a history of being very, hurt by Christians or hurt by the church. Like, having that gentle response can go a long way.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that there are never people who are so hard-hearted or just so toxic that it's not even worth your own energy, trying to engage, because
Sure.
I've encountered a lot of people like that too, unfortunately. So it doesn't mean you need to engage every person, but I think there's a lot of power in a gentle answer.
Yeah, I think there's, when I'm trying to assert my viewpoint, talk to somebody about something, or have them better understand me, you can't really hammer somebody into or back them into a corner to have them change their mentality on something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They have to do so willingly. You can't force somebody into thinking something different, regardless of if you have all the facts and logic and data and statistics to back up your side. Mm-hmm. People decide to change their view on something. They're not really made to. And right. I think with whether it's, a Christian or a Muslim talking about their faith, or how we're handling people who are panhandling and homeless, I think being willing to take a pause, take time out of our day to interact with other human beings, and do so in a calm manner, and just like go in with a willingness to understand and listen, oftentimes leads to the best conclusions. And to me, that's part of what we want to do a bit with this podcast, where things are not so closed and shut. I've had so many instances in my life where I went into something with like young, idealized, starry eyes, thinking, oh, I've just got all the answers, right? As some freaking 16-year-old kid. Mm-hmm. Oh, I've got all the answers. I've got it all figured out. And then you realize, oh, wait, I thought that we could just resolve poverty by throwing money at the problem. Mm-hmm. I thought we could just resolve homelessness by throwing money at the problem. I thought I could just cite a bunch of facts and statistics and logic to convince somebody of exactly what I believe. And it's not to say that none of these things, whether it's giving money or citing facts, statistics, and logic, it's not to say that any of these things are bad, but oftentimes solutions are more complicated, and we need to do more listening.
So, circling back really quick to, when we're talking about the Third Commandment and taking the Lord's name in vain, for me, when I was growing up, I grew up in the church, and I always thought that the Third Commandment, taking the Lord's name in vain, meant, like, you can't say, oh my God, or you can't, you know what I mean? Like, you can't swear, like, mix it with God's name, that kind of thing, like, with the words you're saying. So, I guess, how would you respond to that, or how would you maybe correct that interpretation or build off of it?
Sure. So, I don't think that that's necessarily, something that you should go around saying a ton, but I don't think that that's the full interpretation of the commandment. Dennis Prager kind of talks about the end portion of this. So again, it reads, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." So I think people oftentimes forget about that last portion. That's a lot of what Dennis Prager talks about in the video, and encourage you all to go and watch it. But at the end, that's pretty intense. The Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. So there's a real weight to this, a gravitas, a seriousness to this. And I think that, saying OMG is not something that would lead to this level of gravitas. I think with that better explanation of doing evil in the Lord's name, of discrediting the Lord by what you're saying or your actions, misrepresenting him intentionally in these ways, I think that really has the weight that would justify this second half in my mind.
Do you think that you can mistakenly do that? Mistakenly take the Lord's name in vain?
Yeah, I think so. I think you could unknowingly misrepresent people.
We're talking about God.
And I think that you can unknowingly misrepresent God's character and God's nature. Like, take, for example, the Westboro Baptist Church. Like, these are people that think that they're doing the right thing.
Right, so then all of this understanding of what is and isn't, like, a sin in that way is grounded on some kind of understanding of what is evil and what is not evil. Because...
And of God.
Right, well, God defines what is evil and what is not evil.
Yes.
But if you are mistakenly thinking something is not evil, but it is, and you are doing that thing and, like, attaching God's name to it, basically.
Correct. That would be taking the Lord's name in vain. I think,
right.
There's kind of an underlying requirement in this to kind of tread lightly and work to understand the nature of God and have a relationship with him. That's like an underlying component here.
Well, maybe part of it is just understanding the gravity and the weight that comes with his name, because it is a powerful name, and it is a holy name, and it is a majestic name. So when you are taking that name upon yourself or doing something in that name, like, that's not something you should be doing flippantly.
Yeah, and I mean, James 3 talks about this. He says, not many of you should become... It's James 3:1, where he says, not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly.
Because it is a serious thing to be proclaiming something in God's name.
Yeah, and when you're teaching, you're stating something about the nature of things, and if you're doing so wrong, the effects are magnified as you're teaching likely a number of people.
Right.
So I think, we should all understand the damage of poisoning the well in this way and take it with a heavier weight than most people do. And to me, the response to that is treading more lightly, seeking to understand more. And we can do this in all sorts of situations, whether it's a religious one or it's just dealing with a difficult or complex topic like homelessness. Well, with that, it's getting late. But a little while back, my wife and I were looking at mattress sizes, and it struck me as odd that full or double beds were so popular. To me, the aspect ratio didn't make much sense, and I had one when I was younger, and I always slept diagonally. I think that's what most people do. To me, a more apt solution would be a twin extra long. Similarly, I don't really understand why people buy twin beds. If you're buying it for a kid, the kid's going to grow older, and I think just having it a little bit bigger when they're younger and buying a twin extra long would allow for more flexibility. So with that, you could get rid of the twin and the full or double. So you'd start off kind of the bottom rung of the ladder for mattress sizes would be twin extra long. Then you'd step up to a queen for couples that didn't need a huge bed. Then the next step up from there would be a king for couples that wanted a little bit more space. Then another one that always struck me as odd was I found out that the California king, while it's a bit longer, it's actually more narrow too, so you're not gaining much more space. I think we should start standardizing on the larger size above king, either being a Wyoming king or an Alaskan king. Both of those are substantially larger, and the cool thing about those is the aspect ratio of the mattress is actually a square. So all the complaints that people have about putting a fitted sheet on the wrong way or not being able to determine which way is up or down, it's not a problem with those. It can go on any way because it's a square. So I guess I'm trying to lead a mattress revolution here. But that's just what I've been musing about recently. With that, thank you again, everyone, and have a good night.